Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. If this is your first time here, welcome. The idea of Shop Talk is it's Monday, every other Monday. Obviously, this is the every other Monday, not the other every other Monday. And what we do is, hopefully it's after work for you. You're kicking back. We relax. We talk a little tech, talk a little shop. Specifically, data platform, especially SQL Server. Could talk a bit about Hadoop, Spark. We could talk Power BI, Tableau. We could certainly talk about other products and tooling. Certainly make up answers. Sometimes have real answers as well. But with me, I have two of my esteemed co-hosts over that way. Mike Christensen. How you doing, Mike?
Evening. Doing well, thanks.
And over yonder, Mala Mahadevan. How you doing, Mala?
Hey, hello everyone.
Good to see you. It's been a couple episodes since we had Mala on here. She had to fight off ninjas repeatedly. They were very persistent, and the premium service, the TriPass streaming premium service, you can watch that as well. But that's obviously you got to pay for that. So what we do on Shop Talk, it's a chat-driven show. So put chat in chat, and then we'll chat about it. And if you don't have anything to chat about, we've got a couple things that we're going to talk about. But the best way to get going in here is to derail me and get me off going on a rant. First person to do that gets a prize. That prize is that you got me to go off on a rant. It's not a big prize. Pretty much anybody can win that prize, but I believe in you. I believe in you specifically.
If all else fails, SQL Server 2003.
I mean, yeah, that's one of the things. Although I did recently enough rant about it that I've got that out of my system for now.
Okay.
We got to let it build up a little bit, and then I'll snap again about SQL Server 2003 and somebody putting it on their resume. But a couple of preparatory notes. One of them is that TriPass elections are going to be coming up again soon. Every year we have some elections, and this year I'm going to have to check to see exactly who is on the ballot. I know that my position as Grand Poobah is on the ballot, and so in the next episode we'll talk a little bit about the mechanics behind running for office for TriPass if you would like to do that, and then we'll have the vote sometime later this year. It's usually, if I remember right, in November or into early December, but we will have that set up just like we do every year, and that'll be available for anybody who is a member of the Triangle Area SQL Server user group, which is our meetup.com/TriPass. So if you are a member there, then you are in fact eligible to run for office and also to vote for the yokel who's gonna end up being a TriPass board member. Again, more details on that coming up. I just wanted to prime the pump a little bit on getting people thinking about, do I want to be on the board? And if the answer is yes, or even a qualified maybe, certainly talk to me if you're interested. But also make sure that you're a member of the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So next, I did want to point out that we do, in fact, have with us a celebrity. Mala has been listed as one of the, what is it?
Oh, Kevin, okay, thank you.
Red Gate 100 most.
Me and Tracy.
Yes, Tracy is as well. Tracy is so famous that we can't even get her on the show anymore. I joke, she was on a couple episodes ago, but yeah, Mala and Tracy both selected for this 100 most influential database community people in 2022.
Congrats.
So good job for both of them. I, however, demand a recount. But again,
the algorithm can't spell your last name.
That's possible. It's not that difficult, but it gets misspelled a lot. Actually, it's usually the first name that gets misspelled as well. Like, it's 5 letters. It's a very common Irish name. It's not that difficult. And yet, people struggle. So we got Mike in chat. Who prints money for TriPass, and who decides where it is spent? So that's a good question. Do we have money? Mala, you're technically the treasurer. Do we have money?
We the only money that we need and we have, it comes from Kevin's checkbook.
I mean, kind of.
That he writes to pay for Twitch and for the hosting service. And otherwise, since we stopped doing in-person events, we don't have any need for any money. The only money needed is for the software we use for these user group sessions. That's all. It's been like really a smooth ride in the past 2 years. I don't know how that's going to change. I'm not hearing good things about any sponsorship on any front yet. The latest actually I heard was Microsoft charging money for the Atlanta SQL Saturday. So it's not a fun time for sponsorships. So thank you, Kevin. I'll take this opportunity to say thank you for setting up this system that is working so smoothly for so many years and paying for it.
Yeah. No, we got lucky where we had a couple years of SQL Saturdays where we were able to get more in sponsorship than we paid out, and have been coasting on that for literally 3 years now. So not too bad. Do they require write-in votes? Only for people who are really, really lazy and don't even nominate themselves. But a write-in campaign can work. Actually, I don't know. I'd have to check to see. I think the TriPass bylaws technically prohibit write-ins. I'd have to go back and read them to be sure. But seriously, if you are interested in being on the board, it is almost as easy as saying, "Hey, I would like to be on the board." But as Mala points out, you don't really get that much in terms of sweet side benefits. So very little embezzlement opportunity for TriPass. So maybe it's a stepping stone. You get into larger boards, other places where you can embezzle better. Maybe.
You get it in return. You get a lot of visibility, and you get exposure to tens of people.
Right. Almost dozens of people. Basically, we force you to show up on Shop Talk. That's the rule. Now you know the secret of our board. So yeah, that I did want to point that out. That next episode we'll get into in a little more detail, and then I'll bring back the TriPass elections opening banner, and we'll have another couple rounds of that, and then we'll see how many votes we can scrounge up for our next election. So enjoy all that. In the meantime, couple of topics for tonight, and I did want to mention one of them early on. So Mike, that Mala and I cannot talk about that in public for various legal reasons.
Sorry.
So no public statement from either of us in that regard. It's like, you can read details on Yahoo Finance and the like, but we're not allowed to discuss it. And it's all lawyers saying nope, can't talk. So, but yeah, there's information that's available. So one topic. We recorded a couple episodes of the SQL Data Partners podcast today, and it was with a fellow by the name of Kevin Martin. And one of the episodes was on a check system, a SQL Server development assessment system that he calls SP_develop. And I thought it was kind of interesting to get into a little bit. If you're interested in diving into the what's, the whys, the wherefores, check out the SQL Data Partners podcast. It'll probably be coming out. My guess is next week, maybe sometime later this week. But that goes into an interview with Kevin and talks about a lot of the ideas. I'm going to say, check out the solution. But what I wanted to drive off of here was that he does a series of checks. And these are, think of them as not so much code quality checks in the way that some of the work that Mala has done is set up around, but or not to the level of a proper linter, but some more high level architectural decision making, and even things like naming solutions. So as an example, in the documentation there is a bit on naming conventions. And of course, everybody's got their own naming conventions. We come up with our own standards for organizations, and those are the ones that he has for his organization, and works fine for that. But one of the things that I did want to talk about is a little bit about tibbling, because it actually does come up in the interview where he mentions tibbling and why it's a bad thing. In case you're not familiar with the term, tibbling is the practice of putting prefixes like TBL in front of tables, so that this is a table called TBL user or TBL address. And that would put it in contrast to a view like VW address. There are organizations that do use this form of low rent Hungarian notation. And I say that as somebody who knows what proper Hungarian notation is supposed to look like. And that's not to use the integer, like I as an integer or B as a Boolean, that wasn't the intent of proper Hungarian notation, but that this is the messed up, deformed variation of Hungarian notation that we like to mock a lot. So, tibbling, generally something I don't like. I don't like the idea of TBL in front of a name. I think that it's not necessary, and it can actually harm the ability to see what's going on. It also makes your code less flexible in the end, because let's say that you have a table and you want to create a new table, but you're not ready to update the code yet. So one technique that we can use is to, let's suppose, for example, we're taking one table and we're breaking out into two tables. Well, we could create a view that is the joining of those two tables to make it look like the original table while having the new tables split out appropriately. But now the problem is your view is named TBL because your code hasn't been updated. And if you name the view VW, then you have to update the code. And if you're going to update the code, why not just update the code? So we end up in a little bit of a degenerate situation where some of the capabilities easily available to us in a data platform technology, we, by purpose of naming, either prevent ourselves from using those benefits, or we have incorrectly named items where this is a view named TBL. If the whole point is to say this is a table, this is a view based on the prefix, that doesn't work anymore. So that's the short story version of why tibbling is generally considered a bad idea. But where I'm going with this is things get real interesting when we talk about primary keys, foreign keys, unique key constraints, indexes. Generally, we put the prefix on all of these items. PK underscore user, FK underscore user underscore some user parent table, or IX underscore user underscore column names. And The question I wanted to bring up in this is, what are your thoughts on the topic? Is that tibbling in a bad sense? Is it tibbling in a good sense? Is it something that you would consider to be fundamentally different, and why? I don't know, Mala, you've got some thoughts on this.
So my thoughts around it is that generally when I'm taking a quick look at how the query is performing on Query Store or somewhere, and it's showing me that it's using an index, it helps me to know if that index is clustered or non-clustered or primary key or whatever. Just by looking at it, there are other ways I can find that out, but it just helps me if it's right there in the name. For
That's a fair
foreign
point.
keys, I can't think of any immediate reason like that for foreign keys, except that we have a variety of different constraints. So I'd like to differentiate one constraint from another in some way, and it's helpful like that. Like this is a default constraint and this is a foreign key constraint and stuff like that. When I'm running a query or trying to find out what are the list of constraints on this table or anything, and this may not be something that people do all the time, but when we have a really large environment and we work in a number of situations where we have to do various architectural decisions, we write queries to find out. We don't look on ssms, we write queries to find out what are all the things related to this object. So if I have something there that identifies the type of constraint, that's useful. That's my 2 cents on the topic. And I'm also a fan of having views named differently than tables, because that's when I'm looking at a query, I know if there is more to this query than just the table.
Yeah, that's fair points. And so Mike asks, are there tools to allow name and context management? Maybe something that would grab all the names and allow the developer to see them and determine the usage based on context, maybe globally rename and style changes. That information in the constructs of SQL is all supposed to be accessible through SQL. And notice I switched from SQL to SQL there to indicate this is a notion of the language that you should be able to query all relevant metadata with that language itself, that there shouldn't be a separate metadata language. Yeah, introspection, that's a good way of putting it. So in SQL Server specifically, we do have system tables. So we do have, for example, sys.tables that shows you the tables, sys.views to show the views, I think it's just sys.constraints and not key constraints, but I'd have to go and check real fast. But we do have different system tables that give us some details about what those system objects are, the object types, the details around them, and essentially let you build up everything that you need to know about that system object. So if it's an index, what the columns are, what the included columns are, what any filter predicates are. If it's a foreign key constraint, what the table itself is, what the referenced table is, what the columns that are involved in there. What about those generated by other tools? So everything that would be generated regardless of the tool, if we're talking about SQL Server, that's going to be saved within those system tables, because to run the statement alter table dbo.user add constraint whatever foreign key, this column references that table, that column, no matter how that thing is generated, it's going to be stored internally in that system table. And it's going to be accessible from that system table. So in that regard, all of that data is available. And it's not just a SQL Server thing. That's why I pulled back to the concept of SQL, because you can do the same thing in MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, DB2, wherever. Mm-hmm. They're all going to have some capacity to read information schema or various types of system tables and get the relevant metadata for those sorts of objects. And so for me, I'm thinking, up to this point, hadn't even thought about PK underscore or FK underscore or IX underscore as tibbling. It is technically, yeah. And I do understand the notion behind it that it's not really necessary that you have a key constraint on here. And so knowing that this is a primary key, why do you need PK underscore? So I can get that point. I do like Mala's point that there is some information. I think it's a matter of information, and I'm reading. Okay, yeah, I think Solomon and I are going on the same page here, because where I want to go with is that there's a certain amount of information that is easy to obtain. I know that this is a table because it's in this list of tables, and visual tooling shows it very simply. I can easily get information that this is a table versus a view versus a stored procedure versus a function versus a synonym or some other thing that is an object that may be callable in some fashion but is not a table. For constraints and indexes, that information is still accessible, but it involves a little bit more effort to get through, to understand this is a default constraint versus a check constraint. This is a foreign key constraint. May not need FK underscore for that, but check constraints, default constraints, indexes, clustered or non-clustered. If they're filtered, you don't necessarily need to have a predicate or a prefix on there that indicates this is filtered, but being able to form that separation is a little bit more difficult in the world of indexes and the world of constraints than it is with tables versus or views. And Solomon's thoughts here: I'm fine with tibbling for keys, constraints, and indexes, and even prefer them, but only for those specific items. You kind of need something anyway, because key and constraint names are stored in sys.objects, same as the tables, views, etc. So what else would one naturally name these dependent items? Yeah, and there are, if you use this tool and you follow the guidance there is a specific pattern. Default constraints, for example, actually have a default suffix. Check constraints don't have a check suffix, but they have the name of the column. So the table name, the column name, and a description of what that check is.
Oh.
So there is a way that you can get to it, but I do agree here that this is a little bit more information, and that's sort of, I think, Hungarian notation in practice, what it was intended to be, that you are providing some additional amount of information that is technically accessible without the notation on the column, or on the object name, but is not trivial to find and is immediately useful to people and does not change over time. So not the data type int I whatever equals 4, but instead, I actually forget what a good example of original Hungarian notation in C code would look like. I'd have to go back and read the article again, but not the type, but instead the function. So actually a good example of this would be if a string has gone through data cleaning checks. So make sure that the string length is appropriate, that the string doesn't include any malicious characters or anything that looks like an escape character, that the string passes whatever regular expressions, whatever patterns you need it to follow. Then you could have a indicator on there that indicates this is a clean string. So you may have a C, a lowercase c, that indicates this is clean. I have already run it through all of our checks, and it has passed these checks. So that was the notion of Hungarian notation, that you have performed some operation which is not trivial to diagnose, but is informative to the developer. And similarly, I think here, that this is a check constraint, that this is a non-clustered index, that this is an index that includes columns.
So Solomon makes an interesting point, Kevin, where he wants to change a table to a view. I've never done anything of that nature. Change a table to a view. Interesting. So he says the naming would get in the way if he had to do that. So I've not faced that scenario. That's interesting. Good to know.
Yeah, that was the scenario I was talking about. The example I had was taking a table, splitting it off into two tables, but where you don't want to update the code immediately. So it doesn't know the two tables, and instead, if you create a view of the two tables back together, that view, if it has the same name as the original table, can be queried as though it were the table.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Then it's easier to maintain as you're trying to roll out updated code. So if you're in a zero downtime environment and you have direct table access, that's one way to allow for changes while allowing your old code to query without breaking. So checking in chat here. Wouldn't base maintenance operations on the name, as it can be wrong or inconsistently applied, but primary keys and foreign keys do need to have some name and some meaningful name, so would include that info anyway. I think it is meaningful enough. Yeah, I would agree, Solomon. And in the clean string example for proper Hungarian notation, wouldn't clean be part of the name in the first place? It seems silly to add any type or usage info in the name, as that constrains changing business needs over time. Yeah, type absolutely not. You're completely right about that, because a Boolean may become an integer later, and it's int b whatever equals 5, because originally it was Boolean b whatever equals true, but now you found out that you have extra cases. So that kind of stuff does happen. Clean, yeah, I mean, clean could be part of the name. And so the idea is that instead of typing CLEAN, you would say C. And this would be within an organization, generally accepted standard principles. So a cleaned variable, something that has gone through whatever checking, might be C. An uncleaned variable might be U, or whatever, because it could also be this is a variable that is coming in directly from a user. This is a variable that is coming in populated by some internal system. So you could have different levels of trustworthiness exhibited with the way that you name your variables. It requires a lot of discipline. It certainly requires that your development team be on board with it, and it can be confusing to new developers, which those were real problems with Hungarian notation. I think it's a big part of why Hungarian notation flopped into, I'm going to put a variable representing, or a letter representing the type, because people misunderstood what that thing was even supposed to do. Changing table names to views many years ago, but poorly modeled tables. So yeah, that's exactly the kind of scenario. Naming without a prefix. Yeah, so this is where, again, tibbling, I think, at the table level, it's very easy to tell what is a table, what is not a table, and those are in cases where you need to know. In cases where you don't need to know, then just having the name works fine. If you don't need to know that this is a table or view, select columns from dbo.whatever, then doesn't matter if it's a view or a table, with the exception of performance, because there can be performance considerations from querying a view that is actually a really, really nasty query. You might wonder, why is this query so slow? And then you dig in. But again, that's
different topic,
minor.
Tuning.
Yeah, exactly. Throw new users in NS deep end and pull out those who tread water. I mean, it seems like a good philosophy. Regarding prefixes with modern IDEs, IntelliSense renders the inclusion of type info and names as tradition for tradition's sake, but not really adding any real
Oh
value.
goodness. Type info and names. Oh my. That's going a little too far.
What do you mean? Where they call the column names like integer or something like that?
Yeah,
Integer underscore, yeah.
int age, Boolean is alive.
Oh God,
But
that's crazy.
again, that
That's
was
a little crazy. Is there a reason why people did that? Is that just like a preference for some shops?
yes, I think it came down to misunderstanding Hungarian notation. I need to find that article, so maybe I'll be able to pull it up
It's near Switzerland.
because there was a really good article on it. Systems Hungarian notation and apps Hungarian notation. I think this is something like what I was talking about here. So this is an article about the two different types of Hungarian notation. Things like L account name, that this is a long integer. That's a bad idea because, as people like Solomon mentioned, that can be a problem because you change what that type is, and now you either have to rename the variable in all the places where it's been named. Hopefully you catch it all, or your refactoring tool catches it all, or you have say a short called L account num that now you think is a long because, well, it turns out that you didn't need all of the bytes for a long and you could use a short. How do name string lengths become a problem in SQL? If you're talking about the column names, the length of the column name, in different data platforms, you'll have different maximum lengths. So in SQL Server, each column is something like in varchar 128. So the column name can be up to that length. How do the names themselves?
Not sure I understand his question.
Yeah, can you give an example of what you mean, Mike? Because I'm not sure I'm following you exactly.
Why do you think it's a problem?
Well, there are some things that you can't name them, right? You can't.
Yeah, so
Oh.
there are
You can't.
limits in terms of how long the column name itself can be. In SQL Server, in varchar 128, this is in Oracle, it's 40 characters. In DB2, it's shorter than that. Back in the olden days of DB2, you had 8 characters. So if your column name was more than 8 characters, you found a way to get it to 8 characters.
I think Oracle's enhanced that now. Let me check.
Oracle may be longer now. I remember in the good old days.
Yeah, it was 40 for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 40. In a standard program, there are line lengths. Yeah, there's usually not so much of a problem there because in at least when we're talking SQL Server, you specify what is the maximum length of one of these strings for a value. So if you say, yeah, I know, Solomon, that's why I was a little fuzzy in terms of statement there, and I only said characters for Oracle. And 8 characters for DB2 because DB2 was pre-Unicode. At least that limitation was pre-Unicode. And, well, most DB2 installations were pre-Unicode. Moving on. So yeah, Hungarian notation, the two different types. There's systems and application, where the physical data type is a bad idea. The logical data type, that's where we get to the idea of this string is cleaned, or we have gone through appropriate validation, or this is a non-validated string. And that is the type of notation that tends to work a little bit better. But the problem was a lot of people didn't understand the notion And it's also something that's very specific to an organization, which means that you go from one place to another and suddenly behavior is different. So it's not something that we see done well very often, but it is a concept that can work and that has worked. And if it is used consistently within an organization, it can provide you some intelligence. Like going back to indexes IX underscore versus CIX. The that does provide you some
I
core
love what
information.
Solomon is saying. If you
Yep.
need more.
So if you need more than 64 emoji to provide a meaningful column or table name, perhaps the problem isn't technical. I mean, it could be a really, really... So Thomas Grosser has a joke where he will rename tables based on how bad the table is with a certain number of poop emojis. So if it's just a bad table, you get 1. If it's a really bad table, you get 2. If it's a terrible table, you get 3. So, he might need 64 at some point, and will be limited based on the fact that you have the original table name, and then you need to have the commensurate number of poop emojis to describe just how awful this thing is. And most problems are not technical. Yeah, most technical limitations shouldn't be limiting factors in many cases. This is something that I like in terms of Swart's 10% rule. So this comes from Michael J. Swart, who had a rough idea that if you're using more than 10% of what SQL Server restricts you to, you're doing it wrong. And what's nice about this is that this is obviously a little tongue-in-cheek, but in many cases, okay, the SQL statement length is 256 megabytes. So you can send up to a 256 megabyte statement. If you're sending 26 megabyte statements, that may be an indicator that you're probably doing something very wrong. Versus an identifier length. We talked about 128 code units. I know, Solomon, I know that is an appropriate term, but it's such a dumb term. And it's not your fault. You didn't make the term. But 128 code units, well, 10% of that is 12, and we were already making fun of DB2. So getting to that point, yeah, that's not a real 10% restriction, but it is typically that before you hit technical limitations, you hit sanity limitations of you shouldn't be doing this long before you can't do this.
Never mind writing queries and having crazy long table names. I mean, you shouldn't be writing tons of queries anyway, but nonetheless. It's just
time. I'll pick some long column names, some long table names. My longest was something like 90 characters, but that was kind of tongue-in-cheek because the backstory behind it was the developers kept changing their mind on what they wanted this column to do. If they wanted to be a yes based column or a no based column, think of it that way. And so they kept changing their minds, and so every time they changed their mind, I would just add a few more characters to the title, so it'd be something like, I don't remember what it was, product identifier, but not really, but maybe yes, but no, not really, but actually yes, that kind of thing. And I forced them to type that out. They got real annoyed with me, but that's what autocomplete's for.
I like consistency in column names, Kevin. I think that helps a lot, and I think that's one thing we don't have in the environment that we work, at least. And it's just crazy how many, it's the same data that's called by 100 different names in different tables. and it's really nuts.
Yeah, some of that's organizational. Some of that
Yes.
is that you have people like me changing names just because we can't remember what the last time we called it was.
Mhm.
You have business rules where this part of the business calls it an X, this part of the business calls it a Y, this part of the business calls it a Z. They're all the same thing. And this is one of the issues you run into in business intelligence is it's not a technical problem. It's a getting people in the room and trying to understand when you say this, what do you really mean? And then finding out that, oh, well, you're saying this, you're saying that. Those are actually the same thing. And the problem is that you two are saying, you two are talking about the same thing. Well, this third group says the same word, but it actually means something different. And disambiguating all of the strange rules, the strange naming, the inconsistencies, what happens with different companies that get acquired and split off, and different teams that are working on projects. And so, yeah, nothing is named the same, and it's all a mess. And everything is bad.
There's some pet peeves that I like. I've seen people call an ID column, and it's not an ID column really. Like that's where I get a little, or it's like a date and it's really a string. If they've inherited it, fine, but like sometimes that kind of stuff bugs me.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. Going back to chat, Mike says many things are moot. I used to hate team standard styles, and pull into a good editor, modify, work, restyle, and check in. Standards for only those who care. That's why I asked about tools early. And now editors work on the fly, do color coding to help, or at least dynamic highlighting. IDs have improved life immensely, and as well as good compilers, smart editors. Yeah. I think I have opinions on what you're talking about there, especially if I understand the pulling in the code and making wholesale changes. I'm not strictly opposed to the idea because there's a lot of really poorly formatted code around, and some of it is, look, just find a standard and stick with it.
Yes.
Some languages push you in the direction of formatting. Python, F#, these types of languages really push you to, yes, space matters, tabs matter, spaces versus tabs matter, which can be a little annoying, but that white space is significant, and that helps us as humans because we like having things laid out in certain ways. It's I tend to like that. With a language like T-SQL, white space is not significant, and the good thing of it is it's really easy to generate valid SQL that runs. The bad thing is it's really easy to generate really poorly formatted SQL that is impossible for a human to read, short of reformatting it completely. And that ends up being the pain that I experience, where people will write, like, does your C# code look this ugly? Well, no. You look at the C# code and it doesn't look nearly that ugly. Why are you writing your SQL code that ugly? That's something that I've always... That's been an annoyance for years. And so, yeah, going back and reformatting, saying, we've got standards, go with them. Having that we have standards, go with it is a nice crutch to go on. But, yeah. But what do you think, Mike? Mala?
I like having standards. It saved us tons of time doing a lot of routine things and being consistent. So I think it's worthwhile. If I see, sometimes an actual tool will create SQL that's all jumbled up, like business objects, and it's not even business objects' fault per se. It's kind of how you design the universe and maybe some
Oh,
of the
Jeff
settings.
is here. Hi, Jeff.
Howdy, Jeff. Glad you could make it. Glad you're got a working computer.
Yeah.
Or that you have a computer that wasn't blocking Twitch.
Is that row by row, Jeff?
That is.
Welcome. So yeah, so I've seen code like, obviously if you have all the SQL code that's like on 3 lines and it's like super long, it's like you have to reformat it. You have no idea what it's doing. But I definitely agree with a lot of things that have been said. Like I think if you standardize, I had joked about periods at the end is the ANSI standard, and that's clearly what Kevin does. We had a very strong opinion team leader who was like, period, comma, space, no, comma, space, alias, column, and that's how they wanted it done. So I kind of got into that habit, but I can see where getting back into the other habit would be good because I would catch more of my run errors. But yeah, I think it's good to have the team kind of generally agree on it, but I don't get bent out of shape about it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of do.
Unless I
but-
constantly got crappy code from people, and then I would be like annoyed.
I agree with what he's saying. 100%.
Yep. All right. So catching up on chat, Solomon talks about code units being, it is a clunky name, but bytes and characters are both wrong, which is true. A little bit of Unicode and 2 to the 256th. Business intelligence, favorite oxymoron.
Beat me to it.
Sad but true. Let's see. Talking a bit more about.
What's the name of that guy, Kevin, who you used to do all kinds of funky stuff with Unicode? He had a Robo.
Rob Volk has a
Yeah.
whole talk on fun with Unicode.
Right.
Solomon does a lot of fun stuff with Unicode.
Yeah.
There's a few people. Thomas Grosser has a talk which involves a fair amount of that. But special characters and names is a really bad idea.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the counter is, well, it depends on what you mean by a special character. Like, for example, if your main language is Thai, then certain Thai characters aren't really special, but could be in a code page that is based around U.S. English. But putting in a bunch of emoji and table names and such. I'm with you, Mike. I am a curmudgeon at heart as well. The thing I gotta scare you about though is the kids these days are doing it. Actual emoji in column names, actual emoji in table names,
Yes.
and actual
Just
emoji
really
in
scary. Really
in
scary.
descriptions in terms of columns. And yes, there are names that can cause security concerns. Humans can't see the difference between this version of I, this version of I, this version of I. Not to mention the classic Turkish lowercase I and capital I and the 3 other characters that look very similar to an I, the lots of characters that have I with a little slash in them. Go ahead, Mike. You don't have to raise your hand.
Well, I
Just cut me off.
didn't want no. On this topic, I wanted to ask both of you. I've struggled with this for a while, and I've stuck on Consolus for font because it very clearly demarcates like zeros and O's. What is your favorite font for reducing errors like that? Meaning confusing an I with a, you know what I mean? Like, is it just fixed with fonts in general, or I'm not really aware of all the lithography considerations, but I have just found on a blog that somebody suggested Consolus, so that's what I use, and it's actually made my life easier.
Yeah, Consolus is a good font for that kind of thing, and I think that might even be the default for certain tooling now. I forget if it's the default for the command prompt at this point, but that would probably be one of the better fonts that are fixed with. If you want something that is not fixed with, I actually like Fira Code a lot. FIRACODE. Fira Code is a glyph style font where it works. It's intended for working with languages like F# for R, for certain other cases where you have a pipe and an arrow, or a pipe and a greater than, which turns into a pipe character, or a pipe glyph, I should say. It's still technically the two characters, but it displays as a glyph indicating that this is a pipe, or hyphen greater than looks like an arrow glyph. So almost the opposite of your original question, but I think still gets to the basic intent. Courier new, yes. Most fixed width serif fonts will do what it is that you want to do. Those are typically easier to separate capital I from a lowercase l, lowercase I from a vertical pipe, 0 from capital O, that kind of thing. And so yeah, those are probably going to be decent fonts. You may try out Fira code. It's something I enjoy, but again, I do a pretty good amount of F# development. I do a pretty good amount of R development, both of which make good use of those glyphs. SQL development doesn't make as much sense when using glyphs, but how is it spelled? FIRACODE. So that's the name of the font set. And it is available in Google Fonts. It's also available on GitHub. And it doesn't work just with functional programming, but yeah, it's a pretty good font. I also like the way it looks, but I'm not too picky in terms of how fonts look, just as long as it's fairly easy to distinguish many characters.
I have to do R a lot, so I'll try it out.
I think it's worth it. It'll, if I remember right, it works reasonably well with the Magrider pipe. But yeah, does a decent job of visual transformation.
Thank you for that tangent.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a
I
lot
had no
involved.
idea these things. Yeah. Fira code. Yeah. Is that how it's said? Fira code?
That's how I pronounce it. I'm sure that somebody else is going to pronounce it differently, but that's okay. I tend to mispronunciate many things. And 2 more topics. One that I'm going to talk about real fast, and that is a website called Watch Party. So this is where I now wish that we got sponsorship, because then I could drop these links and be like, yes, you should go to this link. But I'm not getting paid for that. The idea of Watch Party is this is something that my team has taken to pretty well. We had one person go to the Spark Data and AI Summit a couple of months back, and when she came back, she wanted to talk about a lot of the different talks that she watched. And well, the rest of us didn't go, but those talks are posted on YouTube. We could watch those individually. Here's the YouTube link, go watch it. But we wanted to have a way to talk or collaborate during the presentation. And that's where a Watch Party does a pretty good job, because if you have a YouTube link, for example, you can just drop, you can put a link in there, and then it'll play a video. You give the Watch Party URL to the rest of the team. They hop in, and then there's a chat room. You can actually go on voice. People can pause and start the videos. So all this stuff works out, I think, pretty well. And we've been doing this for about a month, gone through 5 or maybe 6 videos, so close to 2 months at this point. And it's a reasonably good experience. It's a nice type of thing to do once a week when we're all working from home and still want to watch a video and kind of talk about it in real time. So Discord can do similar things. There are other services that will allow you to set up a watch party of something. Watch party is Discord. Is that true? I don't know. It could be owned by the same group of people. But that is a good question. I am not sure. I am, however, going to kill Polybase. There we go. Yeah, Polybase was taking 100% of my 48 CPU cores. So that was why things got ugly there for a moment. But the MSPDW service is gone for now. So just asking. Okay, so yeah, I don't think it's the same as Discord. It may be owned by similar people, but generally the whole idea is, hey, here's a link and just hop in there and watch this video with me. So I think it's a pretty cool service. Did want to bring it up, make mention of it in case anybody's teams are doing something similar where you want to watch a technical video with the rest of the team. I found the controls, because we use the free version, anybody can start and stop the video. So just make sure that people understand that if they start and stop the video, it is real. But as we get everybody else dropping off here tonight, we're getting near the top of the hour, and 45,000 characters that are not special, meaning no quotes or delimiters around the names. That's a fairly good number of characters there. But we did have Mala drop off. It makes sense. She is, after all, the most influential of us. So she has to get out there. By the way, if you want to see the whole list of that Redgate Top 100 Most Influential People, here's that list again. Mala and Tracy are both on it. So I am very pleased for them. I stop video when I want. Yeah, and so if you're just watching the video yourself, obviously you wouldn't go to a site like this. But if you were watching with a few people, I think it's a pretty handy service. And it does give you the ability, hey, hang on, let's talk about this thing that a person just mentioned, or applying it to whatever scenario. So that's been pretty useful for us as a team. I think it's a good way to get everybody engaged, and where you can watch the video and make comments on it in real time, which tend to work out better than the alternative of almost like a book club approach to it, where we're going to meet here once a week and we're going to talk about this thing that you've already watched or read, knowing that most of the time people won't have watched it or read it. And so does a good job. And if you're in a situation where you can influence, hey, let's watch a video once every couple of weeks. Let's watch a technical video, half an hour long. I think it's a smart idea.
Anybody want to do it with me? I'm going to watch Kevin's cross-apply video.
There you go.
Let me know.
I mean, it's not a bad idea.
You don't need to watch it. I mean, I think you know it pretty well.
Thank goodness. I can't stand that guy. All right, we're at the top of the hour, so I do want to say thanks, everybody, for popping in. Good conversations, and we actually didn't even get to one of the last topics, so we'll save that for next time around. In the meantime, thank you, Mike. Thanks again to Mala for popping in. Thank you, everybody in chat. And until we see each other again, remember, tomorrow we do have our Advanced DBA user group meeting. Next Tuesday is our main meeting. The Tuesday after that, Data Science and Business Intelligence. We'll have Shop Talk in 2 weeks. So we'll have plenty of time to talk to each other. But until then, take care.